Hello there, this is James Crofty, known as RT78, and one of the many things that always makes me want to punch my fist through the nearest wall is that whenever anyone, particularly a woman and or member of a marginalised group, raises an issue of so-called identity politics, every self-proclaimed I'm not bigoted but socialist, leftist, or whatever they choose to call themselves white man within typing distance inevitably floods the comment section, proclaiming that this is a distraction that divides us when we should be united against our common oppressor, working together to achieve our mutual goal of securing better pay and working conditions, housing, healthcare, and what have you for everyone, with everyone ultimately meaning white male workers, assuming in our arrogant privilege and entitled conceit that what benefits us automatically benefits everyone else. However, what these self-righteous white boys who are almost always simply demanding that we stop talking about race, gender, sexuality and so forth altogether because it makes them feel self-conscious, defensive, guilty and threatened, worried that women and people of colour are attempting to take over, either fail or refuse to recognise, is that such identity politics, in inverted commas, are and always have been part of the struggle against the exploitation practiced against all of us by the elite, the 1%, capitalists, or whatever we choose to call them, meaning that we, as the straight, white, cis male working class, are the ones who should be siding with the marginalised and taking up their struggles instead of telling them to shut up and fight for ours, because as the cartoon which I've used as the screen cover in this video suggests, far from being mutually exclusive, even if they're not directly interconnected, we can all tackle capitalism, sexism, racism, and what have you at the same time. After all, as I explained in a previous video linked down as your underbar, literally the only reason why racism as we understand it today exists in the first place is because wealthy and powerful Anglo-Saxon and Germanic Europeans declared themselves to be white and placed themselves at the top of the arbitrary hierarchy which they created to justify the exploitation of the black, which included the Irish and Italians at one point, and the extermination of the red in order to secure and increase their own wealth and power. While it's absolutely true that most of the gender pay gap is the result of motherhood, that is only because paying for childcare, offering flexible hours, adapting the work environment and so forth to accommodate working mothers cuts into the owner's profits. And so just as they've spent centuries spreading racist propaganda to make us believe that the disenfranchisement of black people in particular is somehow their own fault, and putting the responsibility for cutting waste and pollution on us instead of on their own plants and factories, which create billions of tons of plastic, CO2 and other waste and pollutants solely because it's cheaper for them to do so, they've also spent decades spreading and reinforcing the false dichotomy of either motherhood or career. That if you choose to have a baby, then the fact that assuming you'll return to work at all, you'll be paid less and your career will suffer, is the direct result of a natural law as immutable as gravity or the speed of light. And it's worked. And similarly, with regards to the spectre of immigration, our oppressors have spent decades, if not centuries, as well as countless billions, stoking xenophobic bigotry against foreigners who supposedly steal our jobs and threaten our national identity and culture, while at the same time exploiting immigrant labour and playing both sides against the middle, using the false dichotomy which they created of either we get the jobs or they do to justify decreasing wages, benefits and working conditions and breaking up unions so that we can't ever fight back, safe in the knowledge that we'll continue to blame the immigrants who in the overwhelming majority of cases were never a threat to our jobs or our culture to begin with. And even in those cases in which the oppression of a marginalised group doesn't affect their bank balance, to quote the author Danny Catch in his book Socialism, seriously, just as importantly, these are issues of freedom and dignity which matter just as much to people as the size of their paycheck. If some workers ignore or even support the oppressions of other workers, then real unity is impossible. And yet, ignoring or even supporting the oppressions of other workers is precisely what far too many of us do whenever we complain about identity politics, regardless of whether we use that term or not, because we still completely fail or refuse to comprehend the distinction between individual prejudice and systemic oppression, between someone pointing out that the system is racist, misogynistic, homophobic, or what have you, and being personally accused of being Nazi, rapist, gay bashers, still blinkered by the defensive knee-jerk response of wanting to cry, "But I'm a nice person," whenever racism, misogyny, or any other form of bigotry is even mentioned. Because after all, we're oppressed and exploited as well, aren't we? Of course we are. That's the entire basis and lifeblood of capitalism. But as long as we are effectively telling women and marginalised groups to shut up and unite with us to fight for what we demand, then we are the ones who are siding with our oppressors and further empowering them.